Thanks for joining me for another week of Earth Songs, your place for modern indigenous music. I'm your host, Alexis Salih. This week we're speaking with our guest, Paul LaRoche, who is the founding member of the legendary group Brulé. Paul, thanks for being with us.
Alexis, it's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to it.
And so today we're playing music from your album Hidden Heritage, but also your most recent release, Tribe, which is your 22nd album. Quite impressive, 22 albums since the group's start in 1995. Paul, tell us a little bit about how this music project all started.
Let me give you just a background here of how this whole thing started. I was one of the Native American children who was adopted at birth, and I was removed from our country's reservation system. I wound up in the care of two wonderful parents, and I grew up as part of a small white middle-class farming community in southwest Minnesota. But see, there's a strange twist to our story. I was never told of my true Native American heritage because it was taboo back in earlier times to openly proclaim that you had Native American descent in your family tree. And so many times that information was kept secret, as it was in my family. I knew I was adopted. My parents told me that, and they told me I was French-Canadian, which was partially correct. But they left out the Native American side, and the years went by. I lost both of my wonderful parents in the year 1987. My wife, Kathy, while going through their personal belongings, discovered and she stumbled across my adoption papers. And she always knew there was going to be some great significance in my background, and she just had that intuition. And when she found the adoption papers, she began a search. And that search culminated on Thanksgiving Day of 1993 when she connected me up with my biological family. She had found them. I had a conversation with my biological brother. Neither of us had known the other had existed all those years. And we went on to exchange our life stories. And of course, it was a life-changing moment, as you can imagine. And at the close of that conversation that evening, he said something that was to change the course of destiny for my family and I. He said, "Come on home." And we took this great leap of faith and left our comfort zone behind. We were living in Minneapolis at the time, and we packed up our bags and headed out to South Dakota to the smallest of the Sioux reservations out there and met our new family. And that was the beginning of the Brulé journey. That's how we started. And the inspiration, of course, as you can kind of guess, the inspiration from being brought back into a culture that was removed at birth was very inspiring. It's the kind of thing that every songwriter hopes comes along in their life. You long for that kind of thing. And we were very fortunate. We were blessed. We were lucky that it happened in our life. Everything that happened since that date has been a product of that family reunion and being brought back into that culture that was removed at birth.
Wow. And what has that experience been like from growing up sort of in a city lifestyle, urban lifestyle, to living on a reservation?
It's kind of a spiritual thing. I consider myself a true product of two different worlds and two cultures. And I am a son of two mothers, and I'm equally proud of both. And so I have a unique perspective on things. I look at them from both sides and from both different cultures. It just so happens in my case, Alexis, that I was a product of two worlds that were at odds with each other throughout America's growing pains. And in that difference, I found a place in between those two worlds where there was kind of a peace, there was a tranquility. And that's the place where I've always drawn my inspiration from, the best of these two worlds. And if you think about it, you could take any two cultures from across the world that were at odds with each other, and the result would be the same. You try to find something positive out of the two. You try to look for the best of both. At least that's what I did. I knew early on I wanted to take the high road, and that's what we've tried to do over the years. So our music is really simply a byproduct of this reunion of one individual that crossed the span between two different cultures.
And let's talk a little bit about when you first started getting into the music of Brulé. I'm guessing this experience in your life definitely had a lot to do in the influence of making the music. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I was a little naive at first when I started this because I was high on energy and high on enthusiasm, and I was short on experience within the Native American culture. So I had to go through a bit of a learning curve. What I mean by that is most indigenous cultures have a heavy spiritual base. And most mainstream cultures do as well. But I think it's a little more prominent in some of the indigenous cultures. And when I began to try to, I would say, use the music and sounds that I had grown up with as a mainstream kid And keep in mind that I'm kind of a product of the 1960s and 70s. I guess I still consider myself to be like an old rock and roller, because the 60s and 70s were my primary musical influences, and those were great times in the world of rock and roll. But when you bring that into the Native American culture, you have to be careful how you use these different elements, because now I was part of a culture where there was a heavy spiritual element in there. For instance, if I wanted to use the traditional drum, which we do, and which we do very regularly, it isn't an instrument that you can just pick up and toss in the back of a truck or trailer and throw it in a case and pull it out and throw it into the show. It's an instrument that needs to be treated carefully. There's certain protocol that has to be used. It's transported a certain way. Only the men are supposed to be allowed to touch the drum. It needs to be blessed before every performance. And so there's factors in there that you don't think about, that other people would never think about. As a matter of fact, I'm sure we have fans in our audience that have never realized that we have to pay attention to those kinds of things. But in fact, we do every time that we perform. And every time that we rehearse, it's the same thing. So it was really quite a process of trying to learn and understand the traditional aspects of the Native American culture, and then bring them carefully and respectfully into the mainstream. And that process is still ongoing to this day. I'm still learning.
Paul LaRoche, founding member of the legendary group Brulé, is our guest today. From the album Tribe, this is Reconciliation. All right, from Brulé, that's Reconciliation from the album Tribe, the 22nd release from the group. So, Paul, give us a little background on this track, Reconciliation.
Well, it's a very unusual project. I would say over the course of the 22 CDs that we've done, that the Tribe project, it's really in its own category. And what I mean by that is that the Tribe project was a musical project that really originated back in the year 1996, almost when we were just starting out. Just to give you a little background, there was a group of individuals that came to the Minneapolis-St. Paul area back in 1995, 1996 with the intentions of putting together one of the first Native American Broadway musicals. As you can imagine, it was a group of producers and some writers and movie director and much other people. Somehow we got selected to be part of the music program. Brulé had just released our first CD, which is called We the People. It had gained some attention, and it had done pretty well in its initial release internationally, and it did pretty good here in the United States, but it really did better in foreign markets. But we got the call to come and be part of this project, and of course, I was excited and enthusiastic, and I still would be. I wouldn't have never turned down the opportunity. So we jumped on board, and we gave it everything that we had. We put about a year and a half into it. Myself, I ended up writing about 65 pieces of music that were intended to be parts of this musical, or play, whatever you want to call it. And I had the storyline, I had the script, and I tried to work accordingly. And when the whole thing was said and done, as I look back on it, I think it was a wonderful attempt. It didn't do very well. It didn't meet very well with the critics. And I think what they thought was that it was a little bit of a sellout when it came to the Native American traditional culture. And as I look back on it today, I think that it became a little bit too over-commercialized, a little bit too mainstream. And of course, we were just following direction from the producers, so we did everything that we could to try to meet their expectations. But whatever the case, it wasn't meant to be. It was ahead of its time a little bit as I look back on it 20 years later. And I wouldn't have changed a thing. I wouldn't have done anything different. But the music of Tribe, consequently, our 22nd release was really, it was some of the first music that we ever produced. And it's almost as if we had to create the music and give it a little bit of a launch. And then we just had to let it rest for a long period of time. It just had to. I mean, that's the way it went. There was nothing we could do about it. And as I was going through some of the archives here in the last couple of years, I stumbled across the Tribe project. And to me, it felt like it was as relevant as ever. It still had a voice. It still sounded like it was fresh. And it still sounded exciting. It was strictly a personal intention to give it another life, and I just felt that it needed to be released. I went back to work on it, I remastered it, and that's what it is. That's the Tribe project.
And what does the album title Tribe mean to you?
Well, it spoke pretty clear to me. I don't know what it meant to the original show producers, but even back in those days, I think that they were looking for something short, something that spoke. When you look at a movie title or a Broadway musical, I will tell you this. The show producers had just come off the coattails of a Broadway musical that I'm sure you've heard of. It's called Rent.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very successful Broadway play. It's still successful to this day. So I was working with the guys that produced that play. And I guess Rent in itself, it speaks kind of clearly. It's a single word. It makes a statement. It's pretty easy once you watch the first 20 minutes of the play to see what was happening. And I think Tribe said the same thing. So it had an appeal to the producers, and it had an appeal to me because now I had come from mainstream America into what I might call tribal America. So Tribe has always carried kind of a heavy connotation for me. I always liked the title. I always believed in it, and I wanted to bring it back out.
All right. And over the years, Brulé's performances, talking about sort of the performance aspect, over the years, Brulé's performances have really evolved into what you guys call America's #1 Native American music and dance show, collaborating with a lot of musicians and really including all different kinds of dance performers. How did that all develop?
Well, it developed very slowly and painstakingly over many years. We didn't really know how the final version of Brulé was going to end up, and maybe we still don't know to this day because we're still developing as we speak. We're working on a genre of music that has yet to be defined, and I'm talking about what I call contemporary Native American music. It's a legitimate music category. It needs to be established. It does not have a place in the Grammys. We don't have a category in the Grammys for contemporary Native American music, just the traditional music. So we're still trying to forge this out. I call it pioneering the last musical frontier. And I do believe that we're probably one of the last of the small minority cultures across the world that have yet to gain a foothold in the mainstream music and entertainment world. And so we're working on that. It's a delicate process, and I think that's why it's taken so much time. And we're a small culture. We're the smallest of the minorities in America. There's over 560 recognized tribes here in America, but you put them all together, and we're still the smallest minority. So we're a heavy spiritual culture with a small voice in the mainstream. So we continue to work hard at that. It's just something that we're still trying to forge out. We're still trying to get recognition for it. It's ongoing. Brulé, we may only open the doors. And we hope that maybe the next generation behind us can come along and take over. And we'll have to see how it goes. But it's ongoing as we speak.
Paul LaRoche of Brulé is our guest today. We've got more music coming up from them, and we'll be right back to continue our conversation. Visit Earth Song's music on Instagram or find us on Facebook to keep up to date on your favorite Indigenous music. If you heard a song earlier in the show and didn't catch the name or who the artist was, you can find a full playlist of today's show at earthsongs.net. Stick around after the break. We've got a lot more music ahead. We are back with our featured artist this week. From Brulé and the album Tribe, this is Butterfly. From Brulé, that's Butterfly off the album Tribe. Paul LaRoche, founding member of the group, is with us today. Paul, tell us about this song.
If I were to go back over the storyline of Tribe, I would say that it probably required a lot of imagination to really latch onto, as opposed to a solid foundation. I'm not criticizing it, but it was a little bit tough to sink your teeth into. And so there was a part of the script where the male and the female components in the play came together and they were at odds with each other. And of course, they had to overcome that. There was a love scene during the performance. And the song Butterfly was one of the tracks whereby the male and the female role model began to overcome their obstacles, see past their cultural differences, and move on to where they could elevate themselves up into a spiritual plane. And so with that information, it's kind of heavy, when you're trying to write a piece of music, and it gave me a lot to work with. So I would say that the song Butterfly, as a songwriter, gave me a little bit more to work with. I was able to work with several different tempos and put a little more production into it. It was a fun track to work on. It was exciting when I was reading the script, and I knew when I came to the piece of music that it would be a challenge. And I enjoyed the challenge, and I guess it is what it is today, but it stands out kind of as an unusual track out of the 18 songs on the CD.
And let's talk a little bit about your music production. Is what inspired you to create the group still inspiring you today? Throughout the years, have your musical influences changed?
When we went through this change in life, when we made the discovery of our new heritage and had the reunion back on my reservation back in 1993, it really opened up the floodgates. And I can't overemphasize that enough. I mean, the floodgates came open. I mean, there's so much pouring out to this day, 20 years later, that I probably will never capture it all in my lifetime. I'm quite certain of that. But what happened back then is that, ironically, the inspiration came, but there really wasn't a band. So it's kind of like you never have the best of everything all at one time. I'm sure that that's the way it goes in life, but you have to make the best of it. So what we did is, my daughter at the time, who was still in high school, when we were part of this family reunion on the reservation, she was a flute player, classical flute, and she was good. She had kind of put the flute away by the time she was a junior in high school. That she kind of lost her enthusiasm with it, and she was more into contemporary things, and classical music didn't really do that much for her, so she'd kind of put the flute away. When this whole thing started, she was in her senior year, and of course I went down to Albuquerque while she was a senior. I had to abandon the family for a little bit, I'm sorry to say, but I went to Albuquerque to record the first CD, We the People, and was down there for about 4 months. And during that time, I tried to forge out what we call the Brulé sound. And I came back home with the initial tracks from the first CD, We the People. And the CD was released. It did pretty well. And we were going to go out and start playing. Well, I shouldn't say we. I was going to go out and start performing, but I was just a soloist. And I was kind of at a low point. I didn't have any equipment, anything. So I'd rented a piano, and I was going to go to Rapid City, which is about 3 hours from our reservation here in South Dakota, and perform as a soloist at an art show in a mall. I think my daughter felt sorry for me. Anyway, she volunteered to come along. And she got her flute out of retirement and dusted it off. And she said, if you write the melodies down, Dad, I'll come with you. And so I did that. And we didn't know what to expect. I bought one 30-count box of CDs, and I had to really scrimp and scrape to do that. And I didn't know if people were going to laugh us out of the mall or what was going to happen, but we sold that first box of CDs within the first hour of a 3-day weekend. And so we knew that we were onto something at that time, and we just took orders. We kept playing, and Nicole played her heart out. She's been along ever since. Nicole has not missed a performance in the last 20 years. And since that time, my son came on board, and he became the third member of Brulé. He taught himself to play guitar while he was going to college. He's a little older than Nicole, so he became the group guitarist. So we're kind of a family group at the core, and we filled in with different musicians, and we knew the traditional dance element was very important, so we filled in the traditional dancers with people that we knew, and nieces and nephews and cousins and aunts and uncles, and we just filled the group out. And years later, it's become, anywhere from an 18 to a 26-piece show.
Awesome. Very cool. Well, let's listen to another track. This is Hidden Heritage from Brulé. That's Hidden Heritage from Brulé. Founding member Paul LaRoche joins us as we check out some of the music. Paul, you mentioned this song is part of a 4-part compilation album. Tell us about it.
Well, every one of the Brulé CDs has theme behind it. And if it's not obvious on the cover or the writing, and that may be due just to limitations with graphics and the way it was printed, but, back in the producer's mind, it does have a theme, and I've always tried to use that. As time has gone by, one of the things that I always talk about on stage is the significance of the 7 directions in our culture. North, south, east, and west are the first 4 directions. Above and below are the next 2. And the 7th direction is from within. And each one of those 7 directions plays a very important part, as it has over the years. In the traditional way of life, it was kind of a spiritual compass. And in today's modern world, it's a way for our people to stay on the straight and narrow, to kind of what we call try to live the good life, try to walk the red road. So I wanted to do a project where I could tend to all of those directions. And I realized I couldn't get all 7, but I could get 4, the primary ones. So I had an idea to do a project where I paid recognition to the 4 directions and their meanings. So north, south, east, and west all have a great significance in our culture. And so each one of those 4 CDs would kind of evaluate and look at the significance of what that direction meant. And of course, when they were combined, the 4 directions would have a greater significance than any one of the one individual. So it was kind of a 4-part CD recording that when combined, at least from the concept, I hope that it would have some sort of a significance that might go beyond the typical single CD.
And what's the story behind this track, Hidden Heritage?
Yeah, well, it's kind of a heavy track. I mean, I know your listeners can only grab so much, but as I look over the 22 CDs that we've produced, they definitely take on a personality of their own. And I think that personality of those CDs is kind of a mirror image of our own lives and where we were at as a family at that time along the way. And if I was trying to summarize it, I would say that when we started off with Brulé, we didn't quite know what we were doing, even though I think we had the inspiration. I think we were on the mark from the beginning. But our first CD did very well, so we knew that we were on the mark, and then we experimented a little bit in between there. Some of the CDs got a little bit light, and I say that from the production standpoint because we were experimenting. But keep in mind that I was a kid from the 60s, so there was a point along the way where I really wanted to go back, and I wanted to pull from that sound that I was familiar with, I was comfortable with from back in the 60s and 70s, the heavy rock sound, that sound that had kind of a force behind it of its own, even without an understanding of the concept of the song or what the writer was trying to do. So when we got to this Hidden Heritage series, especially Hidden Heritage East, it had a little bit heavier production behind it. It was something that I just had to release, and I wanted to get it off my chest. So I would say that the song Hidden Heritage that you just played a little bit ago was one of the heavier tracks. Some of the listeners might go, well, it sounds kind of like it's retro. It might be something out of the 60s or 70s, and that's probably correct because that's where my mind was at on this project. It was important to get that out there because it's a very important part of the evolution of Brulé. So the Hidden Heritage East CD was probably and is probably one of the heaviest of all of our CDs. And when I say heavy, I just mean it's got more of a rock production, heavier sounds, distorted guitars, might be a little reminiscent of AC/DC, something like that.
Well, I'm enjoying the music as always. And Paul, I want to thank you for being on Earth Songs with us today and sharing your music.
Well, thanks for thinking about us. I mean, it really means a lot to me. As I've followed music over the years, I've looked at some of the indigenous music from around the planet, and I've been inspired and admired many of these different sounds. And I think the indigenous cultures around the world share a very common theme. I think that we pull from something a little bit different. We all have to look for that commercial, point to where we can get on the airwaves. We have a spiritual element that I think that the audience longs for and that they really grab that sometimes you don't find so much in the mainstream commercial tracks. So we walk that fine line between, commercial and being spiritual. And we're like many of the other indigenous cultures around the world. We're just trying to get our music out. We're trying to represent our cultures in a good and positive way. And we're thankful and blessed that we're still here doing this. And so thank you very much, Alexis, for having us on your show. Thank you to all your listeners for their support as well.
Want to find out more about Brulé? Their music can be found on iTunes and brulerecords.com. For a full playlist of today's show, go to earthsongs.net. There you'll find out more information about today's featured artist and an archive of our past shows. Earth Songs, your place for modern Indigenous music.